So Luke chapter 19, verse 1 to 10. If you have your Bible, please turn with me there. So the message that I want to share with you today is called Stay Close to Jesus. Look at your neighbor and say, stay close to Jesus. Stay close to Jesus. Can you look at your neighbor and ask them, how close do you stay to Jesus in 2025? How close do you stay toward Jesus in 2025? I think as we reflect on our year, there are some season in our life, even in the year, and there's some season in the year where we are close to Jesus. There are some season in our year where we are far from Jesus. There are some season in our year where we listen to Him, when we obey Him, when we, does what He wants and be His son and daughter, be His obedient son and daughter. But there's also some season in our year where we did not want to obey Him, when we did not want to stay close to Him, when we want to draw, further away from Him. But here in this passage, and what I want to share with you today is this. Stay close to Jesus. Stay close to Jesus. Here in this passage, in verse 1, this is what we're told. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. In verse 2, a man was there in the name of Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector and was very wealthy. So here we are introduced to a man named Zacchaeus. And we are told that this man is living in Jericho. Right? And if we go all the way to verse 9 and 10, we are told that, and we are realized that who Zacchaeus is. Zacchaeus is not just a tax collector, but Zacchaeus is an Israelite. Right? In other words, Zacchaeus is part of a people that have been chosen by God. Zacchaeus is part of, a people that have been set apart. Zacchaeus is part of a people that God said, you are my, special possession. You are a holy people. You are a royal priesthood. Zacchaeus is part of that as well. And yet here we're told that Zacchaeus is lost. And Zacchaeus needed to be found. We are told that Zacchaeus is lost and he is in need of salvation and he is in need of Jesus. What happened to Zacchaeus? That's the question. What exactly happened to Zacchaeus? Why did he become lost when he was from a people that has been chosen by God? Why did he become lost when he was from a people that God said, you are my special possession? What exactly happened to Zacchaeus? I think if we actually think about Zacchaeus and think about this story in a deeper way, I think Zacchaeus is like many of us in this room. Zacchaeus, when he was younger, he probably went to his parents to the synagogue. He probably went with his parents to the temple in Jerusalem and together with his family worship God together. I'm sure that when Zacchaeus was little, he heard about all the story about God in the Old Testament and how God have saved them from Egypt and how God have used Moses to rescue them from being a slave and how God was with them in the wilderness and how God gave them victory again and again in the promised land. He would have heard all of this story. He would have he ever heard of all the law of God. He would have heard of, this is who God is, and this is what you need to do, and this is His words, and this is His law. He would have heard all of that when he was a little kid, and yet at some point of his life, he was lost. At some point of his life, he stopped trusting God. At some point of his life, maybe he stopped following God. At some point of his life, maybe he started falling away and falling apart from God. And here we're told, in verse 2 again, we're told that here at this point, he was older, and here at this point, he was a chief tax collector, and he was very, very wealthy. Maybe along the way, maybe he heard that, all right, Zacchaeus, in order for you to be happy, in order for you to be satisfied, you need to have a lot of money, right? And maybe for him, the only way that he could have a lot of money, maybe for him, the only way he could be, very wealthy was becoming a tax collector and tax your own people, even though they might hate you, even though they might despise you, even though they might dislike you. Maybe that was the only way. And here we're told that not only he's a tax collector, but he's a chief tax collector. He's the boss of the boss. And we're told that he become very wealthy. In the same way, even for those of us, especially the young people, there are many things that trying to pull us away from Jesus. There are many, many things that they're trying to get us away from Jesus. For some of us, it might be as simple as busyness. For some of us, it might be as simple as, school. We have so many assessments, we have so many exams, and we have so many, tests where we forgot about our relationship with Him. We forgot to fellowship with Him. We forgot to pray. We forgot to read our Bible. Or maybe because we're so focused on our exam and we're so focused on our school and we forgot all about it. Maybe for some of us it's our work, or maybe it's some other commitment. For some of us it might be distraction. It might be, it must be entertainment. It must be Netflix. I'll be honest, just before I came to church, I was a little worried about the fight. I know if you guys know, there was a fight with Joshua Van, right? And the Mexican guy. I was worried that the fight was going to be happen the same time as the service. Right? I know that if the fight was going to be the same time as service, I know that Silas would have gone on his phone, and most of the boys would go on their phone and watch the fight. But thank God the fight ended in 20 seconds, right? And it ended before the English service started, right? But the thing is, even little things like that, distraction, entertainment, can draw us a little bit away from Jesus. Maybe for some of us, it might be hurt, right? Maybe somebody say something to you. Maybe somebody say something mean to you, right? Maybe somebody hurt your feeling, right? Maybe somebody say something that you don't like, and as a result, you stay away from the church, and as a result, you stay away from Jesus. And so the point is, just like Zacchaeus, there are so many obstacles. Just like Zacchaeus, there is so many things that can draw us away from Jesus, right? That can distract us away from Jesus, right? But I want to say this, especially to young people. If you want to stay close to Jesus, stay close to the church. If you want to stay close to Jesus, stay close to the church. Right? I remember talking to one of the uncles many years ago, and this uncle told me, he said, the Bible says, God is a spirit, and we can worship God, and the Bible says we worship God in spirit and truth, and so he go on to say, you don't need to go to the church, you can worship at home, right? You can worship at work, right? You can worship in your own room, and that is true, you can, right? But the reality is this: if you stay away from the church, slowly and slowly, you will also stay away from Jesus. If you stay away from the church, slowly and slowly, it will drag you away, right? It will become more obstacle with you and Jesus. So I want to give you 3 points here, right? How do we stay close to Jesus? How do we stay close to Jesus? Number 1 is this: we must fight through the crowd. Look at your neighbor and say, we must fight through the crowd. We must fight through the crowd. So here, we are told in verse 3, this is what happened. We are told in verse 3, Zacchaeus, he wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. What did Zacchaeus wanted to do here? He wanted to see Jesus, isn't it? Right? He wanted to see Jesus, right? That is his heart. That is his desire. That is his motive. He wants to see Jesus. Right? And maybe the reason why he wanted to see Jesus is maybe because he knows that he's been far from God. You know, maybe he know that he's so distant from God. Maybe he know that, he's so sinful and he need Jesus. Maybe he know of this. So we are told he wanted to see Jesus. And at this point, he would have heard about Jesus, from people. He would have heard about Jesus from, other people's stories and other people's testimony. He would have heard about Jesus, how, Jesus is this miracle worker and Jesus is this preacher and Jesus is, is the Son of God, and people say Jesus is the Messiah, the Savior that is promised by God, and maybe he heard all of this, and he was curious, and here we're told he want to see Jesus. Even though he was a sinful man, even though he did this job that, people dislike, even though, he did this job that people call him, a traitor, a sinner, he still want to see Jesus. And the question that I have for you is this, do you want to see Jesus? Even though, we come to church, right? Even though we come to church, our heart and our mind can be somewhere else. Physically we can come to church, but in our mind we think about a fight. Right? We think about UFC, right? We think about the Netflix show that we're going to watch after, or we think about where we're going to eat later on, or we think about going to, Molly convenience store with our friend after the service, and we think about the kind of lunch that we're going to have, and we think about something else, even though we can come to church, our heart and our mind is someone else, but here we're told for Zacchaeus, he have only one intention, and that is he want to see Jesus. No matter what was happening in his life, he want to see Jesus. No matter what people said about him, he want to see Jesus. No matter people, no matter what label people give him, he want to see Jesus. He doesn't care. He want to see Jesus, but we are told there is an obstacle in his life. And the obstacle was that we are told he is too short, right? And the crowd was there, and he could not see over the crowd, right? But in verse 4, this is what we're told. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way, right? So even though he was short, right? And even though there was a crowd, and even though there were, people did not move so that he could see Jesus, we are told he doesn't care. He fight through it. He run ahead so that he can see Jesus. For a lot of us, right? In order for us to stay close to Jesus, sometimes it requires a fight. It requires a fight. We have to fight over maybe our laziness, We have to fight over maybe distraction, Maybe we have to fight over our hurt. Maybe we have to fight over our insecurity. Maybe we have to fight over our guilt. We have to fight in order to see Jesus. And that's exactly what, Zacchaeus did. He fight. He doesn't give up. He run. He doesn't give up. He climb. He doesn't give up. He wanted to see Jesus. He was so desperate for Jesus, right? So the first thing that we must do in order to stay close to Jesus is that we must fight the crowd. We must fight whatever is stopping us, right? We must fight, whatever is causing us. We must fight to see Jesus. And the second thing that we see here in this passage is this. The second point out here is this. Position yourself where you can see Jesus. Position yourself where you can see Jesus. In verse 4, we're told, and he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way, right? So here we're told that, he just didn't stay there, right? We're told that he climbed, right? He climbed in order to see. He climbed the tree in order to see, right? For a lot of us here, the church is like the tree. The church is like the sycamore tree where we can see Jesus clearly, right? Because when it is in the church that there is worship, it's in the church that there is the preaching of the Word of God. It's in the church, there's fellowship. It's in the church, there's accountability. It's in the church where you can fellowship with other Christians. It's in the church, where you can serve God, together. It's in the church that you get to do that. And I believe that, last night was a huge display of that. And last night, as a church, we come together, right? Even from the little babies, even like Abel, age 3 years old, like to all the, the oldest person in the room, we did something. The little kids sing and they put in the work and they practice and everyone do something and it's a reminder, event like that is a reminder, that it's bigger than ourselves. Right? That the gospel is bigger than ourselves, that Jesus is bigger than ourselves, his work is bigger than ourselves. Think about it, I was thinking about it just this morning, like there are so many, especially the youth, they are there, they're serving, and they don't understand a single word, right? Kenny here, he's Vietnamese, right? Right? James here, he's half Thai, half Australian, right? Luca, like North Moroccan, right? Right? None of them, the point is, even Peter, none of them speak Burmese. None of them understand Burmese. Right? The rest of us, maybe, we can understand a little bit, right? But then they do not understand a single word, right? They do not understand a single song, right? They do not understand a single thing, and yet they serve. Right? Especially James was on fire yesterday. He was doing everything, right? The point is, an event like that is a great reminder that is bigger than us. And when we come to an event like that, and when we serve Jesus, is a reminder that His work and His grace and His mercy is on a display. Here we can see that Zacchaeus planted himself in a way, planted himself in the position where he can see Jesus clearly. And yes. The reality is that, yes, God can reach us anywhere. You can be in your home and God can still reach you, yes, right? You can be in your car and God can still reach you, yes, that's true, right? You can be in your work and God can still reach you, yes, that is true, right? But we also need to position ourselves where we can see Him. If we position ourselves, even though, we are hurting, even though we are disappointed, even though we are angry at someone, in our own church because of they did something wrong or because of they said something wrong, if we, put ourselves in a place where we can hear His words, if we put ourselves in a place where, we can worship Him, if we put ourselves in a place where we can see His grace and His mercy, then what follow after that is an encounter with Jesus Christ. And that is exactly what happened to Zacchaeus. Because the reality is this, right? In chapter 19 and onward, what if we continue to read, Luke 19 and onward, we see that Jesus, His final destination was Jerusalem. We see that Jesus was going to Jerusalem. And Jesus was going to stop at Jerusalem. Right? He did not plan to stay in Jericho, right? He did not plan to stop in Jericho, right? The Bible tells us that he was just going to pass through. The Bible tells us that he was just about to, his plan was just to pass through Jericho and to stop at Jerusalem. But here we're told, because of Zacchaeus, right, because of his desperation, right, because of how much he wanted to see Jesus and how much he longed for Jesus and how much, he's willing to go for Jesus, we are told, Jesus, stop. And this is what Jesus said in verse 5. When Jesus reached the spot, He looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So we're told Jesus was not planning to stop, right? Jesus was not planning to go to anyone's house, but when he saw Zacchaeus and saw how much he wanted to see him and saw his desperation, Jesus said, Zacchaeus, come down. I will go to your house. Right? So when we place ourselves, where we can see Jesus, we will encounter Him. I remember, it is also part of my testimony as well. As for the way I received Jesus, the way I got saved was going to a Bible study, a Wednesday Bible study, every single week. And I can tell you that, when I was going to Bible study, I was going through a lot. Right? I was going through, I was having trouble with uni. I was having trouble financially. I was having trouble, in my relationship, in my romantic relationship. Right? All the trouble, like I was going through it all. Right? But I never, ever, ever stopped going to Wednesday Bible study. Because I know that if I stop, then if I stop going to Bible study, I know that I'm going to be so far away from Jesus. So despite what happened in my life, like trouble and chaos, I never stop going. I always look forward to the Bible study. I always go, look forward to, just reading the Bible together, just listening to, Pastor Samuel explaining the Bible, just fellowship with the people that even though I was hurt, even though I was a mess, I was a complete mess, right? I never stop, right? So even though you're a complete mess, don't stop coming to church. If this is the place where you hear the good news, if this is the one place that is anchoring you to Jesus, don't stop coming. Don't stop coming, right? Because without that, whatever it is that anchoring to Jesus, without that, you will easily drift away from Him. You will easily drift away from Jesus. And the thing about church is this. If you stop coming for more than 2 weeks or 3 weeks, it's so difficult to wanting to come back. It's so difficult. So don't stop. Don't stop. Right? Even if you don't want to, don't stop. Right? Even if you're hurting, don't stop. Even though you're disappointed, don't stop. Right? Even whatever happens, don't stop coming. Right? Put yourself in a place where you can see Him. Right? There might be English service. There might be Friday youth. There might be, young adult on a Wednesday. Right? There might be a Bible study. Right? There might be conference. There might be, summer camp or winter camp. Don't stop coming. Right? Put yourself in a place where you can see His glory, when you can hear His words, when you can hear messages that remind you of His love and His grace and how much you mean to Him. Put yourself there, even though you don't want to, right? Because that's exactly what happened to Zacchaeus. And Jesus stopped and he encountered Jesus. And the third thing that we see here is this response when Jesus called your name. Right? So here we're told that in verse 6, this is what we're told. So he came down and welcomed him gladly. Right? So when Jesus stopped and Jesus looked up at Zacchaeus, we were told Jesus came down and once. Right? In other words, Jesus did not hesitate. In other words, so Zacchaeus did not hesitate. Zacchaeus did not wait. Zacchaeus did not delay. Zacchaeus did not say, "Oh, Jesus, I'm just so comfortable in the tree right now, and because I'm so comfortable here, I'm going to go down later." No, he did not make that kind of excuse. What did he do? We're told he came down and once, and he welcomed Jesus gladly. Not only he welcomed Jesus, but he welcomed Jesus gladly. He was full of joy to welcome Jesus. And verse 7 tells us this. He said this, all the people saw this and began to mutter. He has gone to be the guest of a sinner. He has gone to be the guest of the sinner. If I was Zacchaeus and if I were him and if I hear of this, I would have been so discouraged. Right? People were shocked. People call him not only a sinner, people call him a great sinner. Right? People were complaining, out of everyone else in the crowd here, why did Jesus choose to go to Zacchaeus, right? That's what people were saying, but he doesn't care. In verse 8, we are told, but Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, Lord, here now I give half of my possession to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. In other words, when he received Jesus and when Jesus came to his house and when Jesus came into his life, he made that declaration that Jesus, I will change. Right? Jesus, if I have cheated anyone else, I will give back my possession to the poor. If I cheated anyone else, I will give them 4 times the amount. Jesus did not ask him to do this. Jesus did not ask him to give half of his possession to the poor. Jesus did not ask him to pay back those he cheated. No, he voluntarily, he wholeheartedly, this is something he's willing to do. Why? Because he received salvation, because he received the love of Jesus, because he received the grace of Jesus. And when you receive the love of Jesus, and when you truly receive the grace of Jesus, Jesus doesn't need to tell you what to do. You know what you need to do. You know what you need to let go. You know what you need to surrender. You know what you need to give up. You know what you need to change if you truly encounter the love and the grace of Jesus. And that is exactly what happened to Zacchaeus, right? He was seen by Jesus. He was heard by Jesus. He was loved by Jesus. And as a result of being, loved and being seen and being heard by Jesus, we're told that he changed the way he lived. He changed the way he lived. One Bible commentator, he made this point in verse 8. Right? He said that, if we go by this logic, it seemed like, Zacchaeus would have lost most of his wealth. Right? All the wealth that he acquired, all the wealth that he has built up over the year, all the wealth that he have come to hold on to over the year. If he were to give half of it, if he were to give 4 times back, he would have lost most of his wealth, and he would have not become wealthy. But he's willing to do this because he received Jesus. He's willing to do this because he knows that a relationship with Jesus is better than anything else. He knows that staying close to Jesus is better than staying close to anything else. He knows that staying close to Jesus is better than anything that he could have, anything that he could ever wanted, right? And Jesus said this in verse 9. Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." So by the end of the passage, by the end of the story, we're told that Zacchaeus has received salvation. We're told Zacchaeus is saved. Zacchaeus is found by Jesus. And he is found by Jesus, and he is saved, not what he did, right? He is saved because Jesus found him. And the point is this, right? As Jesus also does the same thing for us, right? Jesus come to our life. Jesus come into our heart. And Jesus come to seek us. Jesus come to save us. Jesus come to rescue us, right? And because of what he have done for us, we can stay close to him. We should stay close to him because of the love and the grace that we receive. Right? So I want to encourage you, especially the youth, is this: stay close to Jesus. Right? For the rest of 2025, stay close to Jesus. All right? The next year in 2026, stay close to Jesus. Yes, there's going to be so many things going to happen. There's going to be so many obstacles, just like Zacchaeus. So many obstacles, so many things that are going to try to, take you and pull you away from Jesus and your work and distraction and hurt and disappointment and shame and anger and guilt and all of that. But you know what? Staying close to Jesus is better. Staying close to Jesus is possible, right? Because Jesus made a way for us. Because Jesus made a way for us. So this Christmas, right? This Christmas, let's remind each other, let's remind one another to stay close to Jesus. Look at your neighbor and say, stay close to Jesus. Can I have the worship team on the stage, please?